Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this continuation of our Bible study in Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 9. Last week we left off with kind of an interesting um, study of the Lech Lecha, which is the very similar words to what God used with Abraham when he called him out of the land of the Ur of the Chaldeans. And we see that coming to play again in the life of Saul, who, as we know, is soon to become the king of Israel. Well, as we leave verse 10 and go into our narrative for verse 11 today, what we find is a very interesting exchange of information, which seems very superficial. And as I read it, it's we read through verse 11, from verse 11 through, verse 17. um, it seems like a lot of fluff. It seems like things that are in there that, um, what is the purpose? Some of it seems redundant. Going and studying some of the Jewish commentators that have left their mark in through the years, and they don't say anything. They just kind of pass over it. But I don't know. I couldn't do that. I just had to stop. And I hope this won't be too mundane for most of you today. But I hope that through the end of this, what I came away with, and I want to give that to you at the beginning so that you see that there's a purpose for this narrative, is that this whole situation was orchestrated in the plan of God to bring Saul to a place where Samuel knew that Saul was chosen of the Lord. And as we read last week, there was his dad's donkeys escaped, and really that's what started it all. And what seemed like a calamity or a tragedy or uh, a bothersome diversion in their life really was part of the plan of God to get Saul to a place where he needed him to be. Saul didn't understand it. He didn't know it. Samuel didn't even really know what was going on. There were these two dramas taking place at the same time. One with Saul, one with Samuel, um, all concerning the nation of Israel and how God was moving them into a new dimension to have a king. And so I want you to think of that as we read some of the uh, narrative here. And again, I don't have answers for all of this other than when I finish it, I sit back and I say, isn't God amazing? The amount of detail that God allowed to be recorded, because that's what we believe happened here, is there was a reason for this being recorded. Everything that's written in the scriptures is for a reason. Just because we don't understand it or we don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't have value. And even though the words themselves do not strike you as prophetic or as having maybe a dramatic impact in your life at this moment, there is a theme here that we see on how wonderfully God is his will and his desires can be interwoven into our lives, and that the minutest detail of our lives does not go unnoticed by God, that he is there with us all the time, every moment of the day. As I heard somebody say, 24/7, that we should be reminded that God is with us, and that the things that happen that may seem mundane, you going to the store, you running into someone at the mini mart, meeting someone on the street or parking next to someone. Yesterday, I happened to park next to someone that was a person I had been praying for and trying to reach out to, that we had not been able to connect. And out of all the 110,000 people in the county, I pull up next to this vehicle, and there is that person that I believe God had laid upon my heart. And God again reiterating that he is in control and that he can guide us to make these connections, and that his will can be done. And so as we get to verse 11, it talks about Saul and his servant. They went up to the city. And again, a long narrative here. Please hold with us as we go. And they met some young women going out to draw water. Okay, what's the big deal? They meet people, they probably met hundreds of people as they're searching and scouring the countryside for their donkeys, saying, have you seen our donkeys? We're looking for this. Bible doesn't give us any narrative of those encounters, but here they meet some young women, and the young women came to the water, to the well to draw water. And so this is, again, very fascinating. We know there's other stories of what comes to mind right now is Jesus going to the well in Samaria and meeting the woman there who came to draw water. We know the story of uh, with Rachel. I'm sorry, with Rachel meeting Jacob, drawing water for his for his flocks. They met at the well there, and Rebecca drawing water for Eliezer as he came. So there's something tied in here, a very common thread. So they come to this well, drawing water, and of course they're looking for Samuel. Again, very interesting. They're still calling him the seer, the one who can foretell and see what's in the future. Um, Again, we talked about that last week, but we see a conversation coming into play here. And a little bit of commentary from the Jewish sages is that, remember, Saul was a man who was head and shoulders taller than everybody else. We get the understanding that he was a very handsome countenance, that he was, you looked at him and your eyes were fixated on him. He was muscular, he was good looking, he had all the charisma, and it appears here that the women at the well were flirting with him, were attracted to him. Um, Now, this must have happened a lot in Saul's life. I can't imagine that suddenly, he feels this calling from God, or doesn't feel it, but it's happening in his life, and suddenly these things start occurring. I think it's just something he's used to. And so these women engage in conversation with him, and the length and the number of words that are used, and saying in verse 12, and they answered, you know there was more conversation that went on here than what the scriptures record. And just by the fact that these words are included, tell us that there was more that went on. And so, the sages say that the girls were so enamored by him that they didn't want him to go. They just wanted to stay there and talk with him and get to know who this guy was, who was so tall and so handsome. But Saul was on his mission. And so he kind of breaks away, and they talk about, ask, have you seen Samuel? Have you seen the seer? And the girls say, yeah, we just saw him. He was just here. He's just ahead of you. Hurry now. Again, very interesting commentary of how, this exchange of how much they are telling him of what they know, and the detail, that he was here, that he came. He's going to another city because there's a sacrifice there, and he's going there to sacrifice today to the people on the high place. And I want to stop here for a moment and talk about this word high place. I was kind of surprised to see this because earlier in the Levitical book of the Bible, Deuteronomy, when God outlines the Ten Commandments and the rest of the laws that they have, one of the things that they were forbidden to do was to make altars that were high, to build steps or build platforms that would exalt the sacrifice and mainly the people going on it above the rest of the people. Obviously, this was something that was very interwoven into pagan religions, and we see it if we think of maybe not so much the temples in Egypt, but there are temples in Latin America, Mexico, Central America, that are places of worship, and where the pagan priest would go high up onto this pedestal, high onto this altar, and do his sacrifices, and all the people were down around the bottom, and he was high and trying to get many different thoughts of why this occurred, to get closer to God, to set himself up above the people. But God knew that this was the way pagan religions worked. And so when he gave the instruction to Moses, he said, "You're not going to do any of that. You will not make any high places. You're not going to make any altars out of stone that you carve." Of course, the exception to this was the Ark of the Covenant and what God had set up. But what's interesting here is this uh, influence from pagan cultures had interwoven itself back again into the worship of the Israelites. And I find it interesting that Samuel was still partaking of this. Um, if you remember the scene here, Solomon obviously has not come on the scene yet, so there's no temple. Solomon's temple doesn't exist. What we have is the tent in the wilderness, which I believe was at Shiloh. But remember that the Ark of the Covenant had been taken away and was still in a different spot. And so, worship is really helter skelter. It's scattered all over. There's no unified place for it. Samuel seemed to prefer going to Shiloh where he lived and ministering from there. But there was no centrality of worship. There was nothing that brought all the people together and had everybody on the same page as to what they were doing. And so here, and whether Samuel knew it or not, or whether it was just so much of their customs and traditions that they overlooked the fact that it was forbidden, is another very interesting thought. But yet, God, in His mercy, didn't write them off and didn't separate them and say, "Okay, Samuel, here you're my chosen. You're still not doing it right. Okay, call me again when you can get things right the way I want them to be." We don't see God acting that way, and I'm thankful. All of us should be very thankful because who among us is perfect? Who among us um, knows how to do everything the right way and doesn't fail in some way, even though our intentions and desires may be good? Our perception, we have to remember what we are. As the Bible says, we are but dust. And our perception and our understanding, the way we see things and the way we believe, is so very filtered through who we are and our upbringing and what our desires are. And sometimes I just stop and I say, "Lord, please forgive me. Forgive me for any thoughts, any desires that are contrary to your word. Please guide me in your word. Direct me with your presence, with your spirit, so that I can sort out the good from the bad, the right from the wrong, um, because there's so much out there. There is so much out there. So in today's age, information and true information, false information, trying to discern what is right, what is true. So many strong opinions going on here that we have to look towards God. We have to know that He's coming soon, and that these are all part of His plan and His purpose, and to not be discouraged by what's happening, but to be encouraged, knowing that all of this is fitting into God's plan. Just as we see here with Saul and Samuel, God is aware of every minute detail, and He is aware of what every piece of the puzzle needs to be in order to accomplish His will. And we can get all upset about it and fret, or we can say, "Lord, let your will be done. Show me how I need to fit in. Show me how I need to believe and how I need to align myself, where I need to position myself so that I can be useful for your kingdom's sake." And so, as Samuel is going to this high place to worship, the girls are still talking, giving them some direction in verse 13 on how to get to the city, and try to get him before he gets involved in his worship, because once he gets going, you won't be able to intervene because the people are hungry. It's they want to get the blessing. They're all hungry, and they have to do this. Uh, Worship service and make this offering before they're able to eat. And so, you don't want to get in the way of a hungry crowd, that's for sure. And so, again, very interesting narrative that we wouldn't have had to know about but yet God is concerned about every part of what we do. So they talk about the sacrifice. They talk about the eating that will go on, and who's invited. And again, very, very interesting. And so finally, Saul kind of breaks away and makes his way there in verse 14. So they went up to the city, and as they were coming in the city, behold, there was Samuel coming out towards him. Again, not a by chance meeting. This in Psalms it says that the steps of a good man are directed by the Lord. This is what happened here. That's even Saul's coming in and Samuel's going out were this very steps that were taken to meet in that certain place were directed by God. And so um, what I see here in verse 15 again is very, very interesting. Um, Seeing the scriptures as you have them on your screen, knowing that this is the Hebrew words, which you wouldn't quite get the same meaning in English. And it says, and Yahweh had told Samuel in his ear. Now, when you read the English part of it, it just says that the Lord had revealed unto Samuel a day before Saul came. But okay, that's kind of clinical. That's just a statement without any emotion to it. Remember, Hebrew is a poetic language. It's an emotional language. It's a relationship language. And so we see something here very, very intimate going on in the relationship between Samuel and God. And other places it would use the word Elohim or El for God, but here it's using the word Yahweh, which denotes the compassionate, covenant enforcing, supporting nature of God. And he speaks in Samuel's ear. I mean, that's almost like a whisper. To us, it's something that's somewhat reserved for those who we have a very close relationship with. When our loved one comes and whispers something in our ear, and the meaning and the how it touches our heart and how we perceive it and take it to heart, tells me here that this relationship that Yahweh, God, had with Samuel was a very, very intimate relationship. Um, and I can only imagine how Samuel and God talked together every day, every night, throughout his entire conscious waking moments, that they had this relationship that here God is just speaking into his ear. Now, of course, you can take it the way the translators took it and just say God spoke to Samuel, and we all know that happens with the prophets, and but yet none of us have been a prophet in this way, and none of us really know how the prophets operated. We don't know how they interacted with God. We know they were special and they were called, but yet how do we grasp what kind of relationship they had and how they heard God's voice? We know there are fantastic visions and sights that we'll see later that Elisha and Elijah saw, and how they talked with animals and thought nothing of it. They didn't freak out because they saw the sky filled with angels. They didn't freak out because a donkey talked to them. Um, this was a supernatural realm that they lived in all the time, and I I crave that. I just crave that, and I believe that God has allowed for us today. That we are to walk in the Spirit and move in the Spirit. And I know that there's certainly a dimension, a realm out there that I have yet to even come close to achieving. And maybe some of you on your journey are much farther along than that, or maybe you're just starting. But to see this and to understand it just pricks my heart and say there's so much more to God than what I've experienced. And I've had wonderful experiences and beautiful times in the presence of God, and supernatural events occur in my life that can only be attributed to God. But yet I know and feel in my heart that this is only just a small picture of what God really desires to do and what he has in store for us. And so Yahweh is speaking into Samuel's ear and tells him what's going to happen with Saul a day before he gets there. And then verse 16 rehearses the whole thing, saying that he will send him a man from the tribe of Benjamin, and you will anoint him commander over my people. And this is what's very interesting here. He says he's going to save my people, Israel. Now, again, we don't always think so deeply on this word to save, but it's the word weho shoya, and it's the word for save. Um, and it's the word where we get Yeshua from. And it's the word that name Jesus comes from. And so God's plan of saving, we get little glimpses of it, that here he's calling a man, calling someone to come and to save his people. Why did he use the word save? Why didn't he just say he was going to be a king and conquer the enemies? But God chooses to use the word save again to just start us thinking on what his real plan and real purpose is. And so just a beautiful metaphor here, a beautiful understanding of what God's true desire is. And then he tells why this is happening. And he says, because their cry is coming up to heaven. They're being oppressed by the Philistines. We didn't get the impression that the Philistines were oppressing them so much anymore. We thought they had some rest, but obviously the oppression starts kicking back up again, and the people, rightfully so, are crying out to God. And again, you don't get that impression. You don't hear about the voices of the children, of the widows, of the mothers, of the grandmothers, of the men and the women who maybe aren't in the limelight, who aren't being called out by name. But this verse tells us that their prayers, their cries, all were important, that God heard them, and that he moved, his heart was moved, his compassion was enacted because of the cry of what they were going through. And so Samuel saw Saul coming in, and again uses the word Yahweh as God speaks to Samuel while he's walking and says, "Hey, there he is. There's the man I spoke of to you." What that must have been like, what Samuel must have felt when he heard the voice of God again. Uh, and maybe, again, it was just customary and something he was so used to. But again, very, very um, very neat on how that is going and how God answers prayer. And so we get to verse 18 as we kind of wind down here. And he drew near to Saul, and Samuel begins to talk to him in the gate of the city. And, they start with chit chat, everyday talk. He doesn't say, "Hey, I got this problem. I can't find my donkeys." It's tell me where your house is. Let me come and meet with you, and get to they have to build this bond. They have to build this relationship. Again, this is very much Middle Eastern culture that you just don't run up to somebody and make your demands and plead your case. You have to build a foundation of a relationship first of all before you can ask your question or seek what you're looking for. And you know, I'm sure Saul was impatient. He had been traveling for all these days, trying to um, find out where the real mission. He was still looking for donkeys. He wasn't thinking anything about anything else but looking for these donkeys. And so Samuel says, tells Saul that he is the seer, and he's still got to go up to the high place and do the worship, building this relationship. You will eat with me today, and then I will let you go tomorrow. And then we're going to end on this part because this is a beautiful, beautiful verse. I will let you go tomorrow and will tell you all that is in your heart. Um, this is, I don't know, I just stopped in my tracks when I saw this verse, that this is going so much deeper than just looking for donkeys. This is the man of God, or God being used by God using Samuel to speak into the very depth of the heart and soul of who Saul is and who he is to become. And so we're going to pick up on that next week. But I want to leave you with that thought about, what's in your heart, and what would it be if someone told you all that is in your heart? What would that be like? So God bless you all. I pray that you have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and Lord so willing, we will talk with you again next week. Bye bye.